You've always been the one who listens, the one who understands before anyone says a word. You absorb people's pain like a sponge, holding it quietly until it becomes part of you. Maybe you've never thought about where that instinct came from. It feels like love, to care so deeply, to help so much. But in truth, it began as something else entirely. For many empaths, compassion isn't a conscious choice. It's a survival strategy learned early in life. As children, they sensed the moods of those around them, the anger that could erupt without warning, the sadness that hung unspoken in a parent's eyes. It's a beautiful paradox. The gift that makes you deeply empathetic is born from a wound you never had the chance to acknowledge. You became the caretaker not because you were whole, but because you were trying to earn wholeness through others. And over time, that pattern becomes your identity. You find comfort in being needed. You define your worth by how well you can mend others. Yet, underneath the kindness is exhaustion, a quiet ache that never seems to rest. Because giving without boundaries eventually empties you. Compassion turns into self-erasure. Many empaths live like this for years, believing that their sensitivity is their strength, never realizing it was first their armor. But a question always waits beneath the surface. What happens when the healer stops healing everyone else? When the giver stops giving until they disappear? That's where the story begins to shift. When empathy stops being a reflex of survival and starts becoming a conscious act of choice. And to understand that transformation, we have to look at the addiction hiding beneath empathy, the compulsion to rescue. The same story keeps finding you, different names, different faces, but always the same ache. You tell yourself it's coincidence or bad luck, but something deeper is at play. Jung called it the repetition compulsion, the psyche's tendency to recreate old emotional realities until they're finally understood. What you don't heal, you relive. For the empath, this becomes a silent loop. They meet the same kind of people again and again, the wounded ones, the volatile ones, the ones who take until there's nothing left. It feels fated, almost magnetic. You think, maybe this time it will be different. But it never is, because the true stage isn't outside of you. It's inside your unconscious. Jung described this as the archetypal law of recurrence. The psyche repeats familiar pain, not out of cruelty, but out of a deep instinct for resolution. The child who once had to soothe chaos now seeks it out as an adult, hoping that this time, love will heal what fear once shaped. It's an invisible choreography. Your compassion dancing with another's need, your patience meeting their emptiness, until you both replay a drama older than you remember. And so you attract what mirrors your earliest wound, the takers, the broken, the ones who mirror the parent you could never reach. You're not drawn to them because you want to suffer. You're drawn because somewhere deep within, you still want to win the love that once cost you your peace. Under the Jungian lens, this is projection and shadow at work. You rescue others because you cannot bear to see your own wound reflected back at you. You fight to save them from drowning, unaware that it's your own reflection struggling beneath the surface. Dreams often echo this truth. Floods, rising water, hands reaching for others as the tide pulls you under. The unconscious speaks in symbols, and water for Jung was the image of the emotional world. Every rescue, every relapse, every heartbreak is another flood, a test to see if you'll save yourself this time. But the water keeps rising. Each repetition brings you closer to a realization that empathy without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. The flood grows higher until the empath begins to drown, and only then does the need for transformation become undeniable. There comes a moment when the empath can no longer carry it all, the tears, the chaos, the invisible debts of other people's healing. Something in the soul begins to rebel. It's not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, sacred, the kind of rebellion that happens when a person finally whispers to themselves, enough. For a lifetime, peace felt like betrayal. To say no seemed cruel. To rest felt selfish. To stop fixing others felt like failure. But in truth, it is the first act of self-respect. Jung would call this the beginning of individuation, the the process of separating from the collective expectations that once defined you to discover who you are beneath them. Individuation is rarely gentle. It often feels like a death, the death of the persona, the mask you built to be loved. The savior must die for the self to live. You stop being the healer everyone depends on, and suddenly you're misunderstood, even resented. You begin to see how much your identity was built on being needed. To choose peace over people means surrendering the illusion that your worth depends on how much pain you can absorb. It's a crucifixion of sorts, not on a cross of wood, but of misunderstanding. Friends, partners, even family may question you. They sense a change, and they'll call it selfishness because your boundaries no longer feed their comfort. Yet every act of withdrawal becomes a resurrection, a quiet rising into individuality. Jung saw Christ as an archetype of this sacred transformation, the divine figure who must separate from the collective to embody wholeness. His withdrawal from the crowd, his solitude, his silence before judgment, these were not acts of abandonment, but of transcendence. In the same way, the empath's retreat is not rejection of others. It's the reclamation of the self that was buried beneath service. Still, guilt remains, a persistent, shape-shifting dragon guarding the threshold of freedom. It hisses. Who are you to stop caring? Who will they turn to if not you? That dragon is the internalized voice of old conditioning, the fear that love only exists through sacrifice. Facing it is terrifying, but it is the only way through. This rebellion isn't chaos, it's clarity. The empath begins to understand that peace is not absence of love. It's love in its purest, most sovereign form. And in laying down the burden, something new begins to grow. A life no longer defined by suffering, but by choice. There comes a point when even light must pass through darkness to become pure. For the empath, that descent feels like collapse. The loss of everything they thought made them good. The roles that once gave them meaning begin to dissolve. Caretaker, rescuer, listener, healer. This is the Negrito, the black phase of alchemy, where identity burns in its own ashes. Here, the empath is no longer saving others. They are simply surviving. The silence, once filled by others' voices, now echoes back their own emptiness. Dreams grow strange, houses filled with endless noise, hands carrying heavy stones that slowly turn into trees. It is the psyche's way of showing transformation. The burden is becoming life again. Jung saw this descent not as destruction, but purification. The Negrito is the stage where false virtue dies, the martyr complex, the hunger for validation through giving, the quiet pride of always being the good one. In this symbolic death, the empath begins to meet the shadow they've long denied, the anger, resentment, and fear of being unseen. What was once hidden beneath kindness now rises demanding acknowledgement. Shadow work, in Jung's sense, it asks a dangerous question. What part of my giving was really a plea to be loved? The empath realizes that beneath every act of self-sacrifice lived a quieter hope that someone, someday, would finally do the same for them. To face this truth without shame is the beginning of the albedo, the whitening, the purification that follows the black. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In this confrontation, the empath's pain turns into understanding. They stop running from their own needs and begin to honor them. The heart that once bled for others starts to beat in rhythm with its own truth. The process is not about becoming colder. It's about becoming whole. True compassion, they learn, isn't born from erasure. It's born from integration. The empath who once tried to save everyone discovers that love does not require disappearance. The alchemy is complete not when the empath stops feeling, but when feeling no longer enslaves them. The empath does not cease to love. They learn to love without disappearing. When the storm finally passes, what remains is not the same person who entered it. The empath who once lived through others' emotions now breathes in stillness, a stillness that no longer feels like loneliness, but arrival. Silence, once feared, becomes a companion. It's here they realize silence is not emptiness, it's fullness, the quiet hum of being complete. Re-entering the world as the whole self feels different. The impulse to fix, to please, to prove one's worth fades into something simpler: presence. The empath still feels deeply, still understands others' pain, but no longer mistakes it for their own. They have crossed the inner threshold where empathy matures into wisdom. In Jungian terms, this is individuation fulfilled, the marriage of opposites within. The self becomes both masculine and feminine, assertive and receptive, light and shadow. It is no longer a fragment orbiting others' needs, but a centered force. The wounded giver has become the wise one, not through perfection, but through integration. Peace, at this stage, is not withdrawal from the world, but entry into it with clear eyes. It is active stillness, a state where love is given freely because it is no longer currency for safety. People around such a soul feel it before they understand it. Their calm unsettles chaos. Their boundaries invite respect without demand. This is the quiet power of a healed heart. Jung called it the numinous experience, the sense of a divine center within, a source that requires no audience. The empath no longer searches for meaning in suffering. They carry meaning within themselves. Compassion has evolved into presence, and presence has become peace. The world, they realize, does not transform through more sacrifice, but through more wholeness. The empath's greatest act of service was never saving others, it was remembering themselves. If this message resonates with you, it means you've begun that same sacred rebellion, the journey from carrying others to finally carrying yourself.